When I started teaching personal finance classes probably 35 years ago, I've come across in that time a number of different strategies or a number of different options to somehow substantially increase people's probability of success. The sad thing is that most of those things are marketed or sold by individuals who feel like they can capitalize on the very human behaviors that can cause us to experience frustration or experience problems in this process. As we've continued to develop our materials, as we've talked, as we've taught, as we've actually explored, as we've observed, we've found that ultimately this entire process, we believe, comes down to something that I'll just simply call the science of personal prosperity. We do not believe that the process has to be as complex as most people make it. Ben Franklin, when he talked about that when he was 16 years old, and he sat and wrote in his journal, why do people make this so complex? I think even Ben Franklin was experiencing for himself that this really is a formula. There are some things that are going to increase your probability of success in a very significant way. In the science that we have broken down, we'd like to talk about three very specific intelligences that we believe will substantially improve the probability of your success. The first, of course, as we've talked about this, you've heard about a number of times, is behavioral intelligence, of knowing what works and what doesn't work. Focusing on those things that we know increase probabilities of success just because we're so human and we allow ourselves to get caught up in things that ultimately are not in our best interest long term. Financial intelligence is recognizing that today we have a lot of tools available for us that have never been available before, especially with information and opportunities to understand what we can do, whether we do it with an advisor, whether we do it with ourselves, what kind of things can we do that ultimately will make it so that that we should in the long term experience not only success in the way we build our prosperity, but also in the way that we enjoy it and find in it the satisfaction that we'd like to have. The third is community intelligence by recognizing that we're not in this by ourselves. You'll see as we talk about it, it's to whom we choose to trust, who we choose to be as friend, who we have as a mentor. But we'll talk about that once we get to it. In the process, you're going to find that we're going to talk about some principles that ultimately create for ourselves what I would call a lighthouse, some sense, some opportunity to recognize that there is a light out there in the darkness that allows us to make this process more successful, things that we can always look back to and recognize as something that will bring us greater success. And so in this process, we're trying to look for things that are relatively, that certainly increase efficiency and hopefully are quite simple. I have to tell you that there was a group that the management of the Oakland Radio, or the Oakland Athletics, they're a baseball team. They came up with something a long time ago that they called Moneyball. And Moneyball said this: there's a lot of people, a lot of teams, Major League Baseball teams that will hire people that can run fast and can be flashy, and obviously they pay them a lot of money to play baseball. What the Oakland Athletics found was some very significant research that had been done through what's called sabermetrics. They found that actually the most important thing somebody could do is just get on base. Now think about it. Actually, if we did a statistical probability and found out what will lead to ultimate wins in baseball, they found that the most important thing you do is just get the guy on base. And so there's a lot of people that will run fast, they're flashy, and when they're up, they're so fast and they're so flashy, when they have a chance to swing at they'll swing at anything for the opportunity to get on. What the Oakland Athletics found is that actually it's the guy that might be a little overweight, the guy that's not so fast. They found that that's the guy that ultimately will develop a very good eye, and he'll make sure that he watches pitches very closely, and whether he gets on by hitting the ball or whether he gets on by walking to first base, the most important thing is that he gets on base. I had something that was fun that happened when I was a little kid. There was a thing in Salt Lake City called Spud Nuts. They were actually invented here in Salt Lake City. Most of you have probably never heard of them before. They were very popular. They started back in the 1950s, and they kind of franchised, did some different things, but that's not the most important thing. They asked, one of the things that kind of benchmarked Spud Nuts was that they had young people go out and sell Spud Nuts. Well, I was always one looking for a way to make money, so I went out. I was probably only about 9 or 10 years old, and I got a little job selling Spud Nuts. And so you go around to these businesses or door to door, actually asking people if they wanted to buy Spud Nuts. When I first started the process, I had a very long speech. I'd talk to people. I'd try to get a sense of who they were. I'd try to get a sense of what their what I guess you could say even objectives, although I didn't understand it at the time. It finally came down to this. I developed a little speech. It was very short. It was very efficient, that I felt like ultimately communicated what I was there to do anyway. I simply said, would you like to buy some nice, fresh, golden brown, mouth-watering spud nuts? They're only 35 cents. And that's what they cost at the time. A bag of 6 of them, they cost 35 cents. It just turned into an overnight success. I was able to sell all the spud nuts I had. In fact, I was actually made a team leader, and they tried to encourage me to go out and teach the other boys how to sell spud nuts. Well, this is something that we, now in personal finance, I'd like to see if we could develop for ourselves those same tools of efficiency by ultimately knowing that whenever we can be as simple as possible, then that it can lead to efficiency. There's a couple of principles that I think is always helpful for people to understand with this. There's a principle called Occam's razor. And Occam's razor simply says this: if you've got two different variables, you've got different choices for accomplishing the exact same objective, always select the one that's the more efficient, the one that you could actually accomplish without you don't have to multiply all of the things that you do unnecessarily. You can, whenever there's observable similar outcomes, simple is the thing that is actually better. Leonardo da Vinci said the exact same thing when he said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. One that I've enjoyed is Albert Einstein saying make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. Now with that, I, in this, have always used probably my primary motivator in the process, and that is this concept of being a multiplier. Is it possible, by using very simple strategies, that I could become the multiplier that ultimately I would like to be, or that I feel like would provide for me the kind of prosperity that satisfies my own personal expectations? And so, whenever I efficiently synergize desirable outcomes, I want you to know that I believe that that I want to pursue 5 what I refer to as universal points, not just financial success, but I want to also do what I would refer to as time management. How do I manage and utilize my time? And these are the things I want to multiply, I want to get good at. How do I take care of my health in such a way that I have physical and emotional wellness? Personal prosperity, of course, is what we spend so much time talking about in our class, the hopeful realization of personal resource expectations. Spiritual meaning, individual spiritual expectations, and relationships, the critical sense of others. You'll see that repeatedly in the things that we talk about in our class. What I'll do now is just go through what kinds of things I hope. Now, so if I had the spud nut message, or if I had the Oakland Athletics Moneyball message, what might it be in personal finance going into this? What might I, as a student of this class, or as a student of this process, emblazon on my forehead and suggest for myself if I always follow that formula? I cannot tell you how many times my wife and I, during this process, we're just like anybody else. There's times we had more money than other times, and there are times that we felt like we ran out of money faster than we anticipated running out, and we get a little frustrated. But I was always able to say to my wife, and it made so much difference in our relationship and our eventual success, but I know we're following the formula. And we never broke the formula once we'd established the formula for ourselves and began working it. So number one, I want to point out, and of course it's all based on that behavior. What are the things that we know for a fact work the very best? I'm going to suggest here's your Moneyball formula as it relates to personal finance. Number one is that HX11 formula that we talked about, where so many things can become automatic and not subject to emotion, and not subject to manias, and not subject to the kind of passing fantasies that come with individuals that are also involved in the process. My second thing is this: we talked a little bit about it when we did our lecture about $1 Million Choices, and that's this. There's a lot of people who have watched this who will say, but boy, if I'd have just learned this thing back in my 20s, then I'd have been okay. I hope that everyone watching this and learning from it can adopt this 40-year planning cycle that we're talking about. It's a 40-year planning cycle. If you've got 40 years to live, and I don't believe there's a lot of people watching this presentation right now, unless there's some specific thing that would suggest otherwise. I'm just telling you, you've got 40 years to live. And if you've got 40 years to live, every single thing we talk about is just as applicable to you today as it would have been had you learned it when you were just 20 years old. And I hope you can catch that. That is part of the imagination that you have. Our third is the one that we spent so much time talking about in our last lecture, and that's $1 Million Choices. I don't know how to express it in any other way. no matter what kind of a formula we get set up on, what kind of a path we take off on, there's something about the natural momentum that is established when we're constantly looking for new ways, when we're primed to capitalize on opportunities that allows us to become more efficient and becomes more successful. I hope that you catch the vision of what can happen, and I hope somehow as we went through $1 Million Choices, you did catch the vision of what it means to know that you can make gigantic differences in your future by simply making some very small choices today. My next is this concept of having a multiplier mindset. I want you to know, now this kind of might come as a little bit of a surprise to some here. There are many people, especially in faith-based societies, that have what I'd call an Armageddon mindset. They're very focused. They're very riveted on the fact that this could be the last days. This could be the end. This could be the time that everything's going to explode. There comes new news every day of somebody who's projected that Armageddon will be here in a month or 2 months or 4. Why do those happen? Why do those work so efficiently? Because the human mind is trained. It is actually, the DNA of the mind is preset to be most fearful. That's the one. We know that humans, when it comes to personal finance and most things that they do in their life, have two fundamental emotions that cause them to do two dramatic things. Number one, it's greed, and number two, it's fear. Let me just tell you this: which of those two is the most powerful when it comes to the kinds of activities that you and I will engage in regularly? Obviously, greed can have an impact on people, but fear is far more compelling. And most people will reorganize their thoughts and their emotions and everything based upon what we call fear. We talked about that scripture in Luke 17, where the nobleman left the vineyard. When he came back, he rewarded those that were good multipliers. He said, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Have authority over 10 cities," like we talked about. But to the one who feared, the one who was so caught up in fear that he buried his talent, the Lord of the vineyard took it from him. He said, I've got to make sure that that's in the hands of people who know how to multiply resources. We'll talk more about it. I just have to tell you in a very strong way, imagine for yourself the difference it makes to your overall creative capacity, to the way you view this world, to the way you make decisions, if you're imagining for yourself that this is the end, and ultimately we only have 3 months or 3 years or even 30 years to go. And then imagine being somebody who sees this as an opportunity to build as if you're going to be here forever. We'll discuss this more. It is a backbone of what I talk about in our classes, and I think it's so important for us to understand that it's indeed that mindset of forever that will be the mindset that ultimately magnifies, multiplies, and enjoys the kinds of successes and the kind of prosperity that I believe most of us are looking for. So it's the multiplier mindset. It's recognizing for ourselves we're not going to allow ourselves to get caught up in short-term fear and short-term emotions that make it so that we don't accomplish the objectives that we have. When we talk about investing will actually be our very next class. We love to talk about just this. There have been 6 individuals who've won the Nobel Prize for what we refer to as asset valuation. Asset valuation we describe as a process of knowing what an asset is worth, knowing how they multiply, how you grow assets, what kinds of risks are associated with trying to grow assets. 3 of them won the Nobel Prize back in the 1930s. Now, we'll talk about this in depth when we talk about investing, but for right now, just know 3 of them won the Nobel Prize in the 1990s because of this research, and 3 of them just won the Nobel Prize 2 or 3 years ago for this exact same thing, and each of them have identified or recognized and would tell you openly that when investing resources, you can provide yourself a lot of comfort. You can take the fear, you can take the emotion, you can take the short-term frustrations, you can take those problems that experience all the time when people lose tons of money in investing if you'll just do 3 things. If you'll have assets invested where they're well diversified, that are well allocated, and that are long-term. We're not getting into it here because obviously we'll be talking so much about it when it comes to investing. But for right now, can you imagine? Can you imagine that we could take most all of the emotion out of this process if we followed what Nobel Prize winning investors and Nobel Prize winning individuals have done through their research to document that process is indeed the case? Boy, wouldn't that be the greatest opportunity to make sure that we don't allow ourselves to lose money, don't allow ourselves to get caught up in the manias, to get caught up in the emotions or the fears, and that we just invest with some kind of confidence. We'll show you that when we get to it. So here's what we want to talk about. Here's our intelligences that we first discussed. Number one is the behavioral intelligence. That's the backbone of everything that we do. What will work? It might be the greatest idea in the world, but if we can prove that individuals are not are not going to be successful with it, then it's not worth the time that you take to see if you can make that happen for you. So behavioral intelligence just talks about we want the high impact motivators, the high impact kinds of realities in this process. What kinds of things will make it so that we will be far more likely to succeed in this process, and we'll show you what those can be, and then also show you what the caveats are. Some of the things that a lot of people would say would be great ways to accomplish the objective, but we've proven through our research have little or no impact at all. Our second is financial intelligence. And the financial intelligence, we wanted to make sure that we just have the critical information. We recognize that indeed information today is more vast, more efficient, more available, more detailed, and actually more affordable than it's ever been. We want to make sure that we have access to that information and we're utilizing it to the best extent we possibly can. Our third is community intelligence. We're not in this by ourselves. We are more than ourselves. As we understand and recognize those that we'll rely on, those that will become part of, those that we'll listen to, those that we'll trust, those that we'll team up with, those are the kinds of situations that will make it so that ultimately we will be more likely to have this process be successful. So what we want to do is in all three of these is kind of bring them together. We've done it a little graphically so you can see it, just really so we kind of make it so that it's ultimately a subset of all three of them. We build into something that we refer to as spontaneous accumulation. Spontaneous, what does it mean? Spontaneous, you've sort of heard of spontaneous combustion. An example of spontaneous combustion is when you leave a rag in the corner of your garage that you've used to wipe up some grease or some oil, and you don't do anything to spread that rag out. You just leave it kind of in a ball on the floor. Later on, that rag can actually catch fire and burn things down if you don't recognize the problems that can be associated with it. So just think about this. Where did the energy come from to burn that rag? Did somebody throw a match and throw it into it? Did they throw a stick of dynamite into it? Did they do anything to light that on fire? It did not come from an outside source. Actually, it came from an inside. It came from inside that rag. So it was spontaneous. It just happened as a natural consequence of the variables that were placed on that environment to make it so that that thing started to burn. Wouldn't it be cool? I want you to think about this. Might be worth turning off your program for a second to just imagine what it would be like to know that the ability to be successful with your prosperity is all the tools that are necessary are all already within you. All they have to do is be enlivened. All they have to do is kind of come alive. The energy source that's necessary to make this possible are available, and I think that, and ultimately that's what our objective in this class is, to make sure that you can tap into them. So let's take the first one. This is behavioral intelligence. In behavioral intelligence, we want to find those high impact motivators. I'm going to do something kind of unique. Instead of talking about the high impact motivators first, I'm going to shift this and I'm going to talk about the motivational caveats. The things that these are things that people would suggest to you might be a good way to accomplish financial objectives and make sure that you have kind of benchmarks to make this thing work. I liken this. I've told my students in class, how many of you like bumper pads on a bowling alley? I never got that good at bowling. I for the most part, can probably bowl a ball today pretty much down the lane the way it's supposed to go. But I know that when I was much younger, it was very common to make sure that the bumper pads on the bowling alley were set up so that as I hucked that ball, how many of you have been there before when you just were so grateful for a bumper pad to make it? So I still had the complete freedom to bowl down that lane. I still had the exact same expectations of throwing it down the middle of the lane. But sometimes, based on human frailties or human inability, I would actually throw it in such a way that had it not been for the bumper pad, I'd just end up in the gutter. Let's just talk about these as bumper pads. We're going to get into some very specific things here quickly. But for right now, I just kind of want to talk about some of these things that when someone tries to suggest that this might be a great way to accomplish this, I want you to see some very interesting research that we've come up with. The first is this. Wouldn't it be nice to feel like we could have some proper training? Because we as individuals are objective. And if we see the right kind of materials, because of our objectivity, we'll use our wisdom to do the right things. I'd like you to watch a program if you ever get a chance. It's on the internet called Mind Over Money. It was created by Nova. It's where research was done on individuals that were making financial decisions. As they made these financial decisions, they would actually record them and watch what would happen based upon the kinds of variables that they could participate, or the kind of variables that they could experience. What they figured out, what they concluded, is that human beings are extremely irrational. They're not objective. And because of their irrationality and their non-objectivity, it makes it so that we often actually make very bad choices, even though we've had clear and objective things laid out in front of us. There's some similarities in something that we talk about all the time with the students when we're trying to predict outcomes in the market. In the market, in the stock market, the investment markets, we find this, and in the economy. So in the economy, whether it's in the economy or in investment markets, we find this. We find that actually a lot of times, on a short-term basis, we are what we refer to as very unpredictable and very irrational people. We have a very unpredictable and irrational economy, a very unpredictable and irrational investment market. Stock markets go up and down sometimes in ways that we can't even begin to understand or explain, although somebody at the end of the day will say, well, that was because Cuba decided to send a message to Venezuela, and that spooked the markets and everything went haywire, and so therefore that's why the market went down today. We don't know that's why the market went down. They're just doing their best to guess why it is, because those short-term outcomes are so irrational and so unpredictable. But the one thing that we do know is this: on the long term, we're actually very predictable and very rational people. Isn't that the greatest? So markets are actually very predictable and rational. The economy is very predictable and rational, and we want to capitalize on the predictability and rationality of those investments in those markets. And so we just know, we hope that actually, I believe that it's the case also for our class. I'm going to suggest that spiritual outcomes can also enjoy those exact same kinds of frustrations or problems. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to, because of the research that's been done, I'm going to just tell you, and I've got a little website there if you can see it. I don't know if it's so small you can't see it on the screen. I hope that you can see it, that pbs.org, where you can watch that program. I think it's fun for you to recognize, and it should be particularly helpful for you before entering this process, to know that just because we sometimes think we make great decisions, we've got to plan in such a way that we overcome some of those irrational thoughts, feelings, or emotions that make it so that we do not do the right thing. Somebody else might step up and say, what we need to do is have early comprehensive education. Some of you have actually seen that. They started to teach financial classes in high schools. Sometimes they've gotten down to junior high schools, and I see where there's been some classes taught in elementary schools. They say that if we teach someone these things at a very early age, then everything will be okay. Are they efficient? Let me tell you that there was some research done by the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank. You can decide for yourself whether this is important to you. This is the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank that asked this question: do financial education programs work? I love to expose other financial professionals to this, because even they are very surprised to see the conclusion that the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland came up with. They simply said this: taken together, the literature does not succeed in establishing the extent of the benefit provided by financial education programs. And listen to this: nor does it provide conclusive support that any benefit exists at all. Wow, what a statement. What a way to kind of try to, for ourselves, understand and recognize that just because you teach it to somebody does not necessarily, there's an immediate transference of what they've learned into how they actually behave. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm against early financial education programs. I actually believe that if those programs contained a component like what we're talking about with behavior, our research at BYU has proven that the outcomes of students who leave the program are far more successful once they've learned these concepts of behavior that we discuss so openly in our workshops. Our next is this: how about marriage? Working together, that will make things work well, won't it? Now, I'm going to give you some good news later on, so I don't want you to get misconstrue what I'm going to tell you, but oftentimes marriage is a very funny thing when it comes to, will that make you more successful or less successful in how you do things financially? I'll give you the bad news first. In the book One for the Money by Marvin J. Ashton, he quoted some research, and I want you to think about it very carefully. He said this: The American Bar Association has indicated that 89% of all divorces can be traced to quarrels and accusations over money. There's some research that was done recently, and they said something like this. They said 4 out of 5 couples today, in America today, have quarrels and disagreements about the way they handle their money. 4 out of 5, and they have substantial financial problems because of the disagreements that they have. So here it is. Some professional counselors indicate that 4 in 5 families are strapped with serious financial problems. They're just not working well together in this process. That is just an amazing indictment that would suggest, when we know that 89% of all divorces come as a result of money, and that so many people are struggling as it relates. Now listen, I'm hopeful that there's somebody that's married that's actually watching this. You might, based on what I just said, think, well, what's he suggesting, that we not be married or anything? Well, wait till I show you, and I will give it to you. I'll show you some research that's been done on those that are being successful, that are actually multiplying their resources and doing what they'd like to do with their prosperity. And in those cases, they find that the strength of the relationship in their marriage is what they all refer to as the most important ingredient in their success. So actually, then, I'd be willing to say this: when money's working well in your relationship, when there's a good relationship, actually it makes it so that you're far more likely to enjoy prosperity. But as you've seen through the research that Elder Ashton quoted, when it's not working well, it can be very devastating and be something that can cause us a lot of problems. I'll show you a quote later on by President Hinckley that said that in all of his counseling and all the time he's ever spent counseling couples, he said he believes that money causes more problems in marriage than all other problems combined. You'll see that quote come up later. So somebody might come along, and of course, the one that's most likely to do this is some strapping, handsome, wonderful financial advisor that says, but if you'll come to me, I'll make sure that everything you do is successful, because if you'll just follow me, everything will be okay. I don't know how many of you know this or not. I'm a financial advisor. I actually teach. So I've already told you teaching doesn't work. Now I'm going to talk about financial advisors. Do financial advisors work? There's been some really interesting research, and we'll be exposed to it later on in our class. Very interesting research on the professions where people are not good at managing their financial resources. Some would not surprise you because you've heard so many of them before. Doctors, overall, are not good at managing their personal financial resources. Attorneys are not. Dentists, all those that are involved in the services industry. But here's something that people find very fascinating. Actually, we can add to the list CPAs, registered investment advisors, stockbrokers, and life insurance agents, those who actually provide financial advice for a fee. We find that they're also terrible at managing their own personal financial resources. And we find that those who are most actively engaged in the ongoing client relationship is the one that's right at the very bottom. They have, in some research, become the one profession that manages their financial resources the worst. My wife always laughs. The shoemaker's son always has the worst shoes, or the painter's house is never quite painted. Boy, isn't it scary? I think it should be of concern to you that the person that you might select, or the person that you might go to, you might want to take some steps to find out if he's following or doing the kind of things that he's preaching to you that you should do. We'll just tell you this: financial advisors, in our research, are overall worse than their clients when it comes to managing personal financial resources. Employee benefit programs, I'm going to go through a couple of them relatively quickly. Employee benefit programs, we think they've been established, of course, so that it will help people to be more successful, so that your company where you work can help you and can make it so that somehow this process can be more successful for you. Sadly, and it is too sad, because I'm a very strong advocate of most all of the employee benefit programs that are available today, and I strongly recommend and encourage you to become very knowledgeable and aware of the benefits, and then you make a very clear and very intentional decision about whether to participate or engage in it for yourself. Sadly, we find that the employee benefits in the United States today are vastly underutilized based on what they should be. So probably the education programs that are attached to them, or the lively enthusiasm of management has just not caught up with them. So they're not used like they should. Some might say if you get a better education, you'll have a higher income. And that's actually true. A better education does derive a higher income. Does that higher income make it so that somehow you're better at managing your financial resources? Actually, in the most amazing way. Now, I'm going to show you the research. When we've already talked a little bit about it yesterday when we talked about the million dollar choices, and that's this concept that somehow you know that Elizabeth Warren found that as people get more assets and they get more income, they actually become more likely to become insolvent or bankrupt. Why? There's some wonderful research that's been done to kind of document this whole process and why it can be so detrimental to you. It just knows that, and the book The Millionaire Next Door talks about the exact same thing. They'll say this: there's a direct statistical correlation. Now watch, see if you can see this, between the education a person has and the income that they're able to generate. A direct statistical positive correlation between your education and your income. Doesn't make you guaranteed to make more income because you got a better education, but overall, the probability of your success is substantially enhanced. Sadly, though, as we take the variables, now they've got good incomes, what does that do when it comes to their ability to accumulate resources over time? And there's a direct negative statistical correlation between the income that you have and your ability to accumulate resources. We'll go through that a lot more as we talk about the ways that we can utilize our education and utilize those incomes to be far more successful. The next thing we'll talk about is investment greed and illiteracy. I've got some quotes for you that I think will be very interesting. If I started off this class and I simply asked this question, what makes it so that people are more susceptible to investment fraud, what would you say? I've been in those classes before. I've been in those workshops. I've been in those research groups. The first thing that comes to your mind when you say, what makes people susceptible to investment fraud? They'll say greed. You know, people are greedy. They want to make more money. They might say something like high trust relationships. You just love it when somebody that you know real well comes along and recommends something, and because you know them in your church, or you know them in a school, or you know them in some kind of a setting that makes it so that they're closer to you, the high trust relationships. And let me just tell you this, those can be devastating. Those can be difficult. Let me tell you something that you might find very fascinating. There was some research done by the American Association of Retired Persons and the National Association of Securities Dealers that said this: what makes it so that sometimes people are so vulnerable to investment fraud of others? And what was the one single thing that they found as the leading indicator of someone susceptible to investment fraud? I'm assuming you'll not get this, so I'll tell you, it's knowledge. They actually found that the people that have a higher than average level of intelligence of financial and investment matters are actually more liable or more susceptible to investment fraud. And it just seems so unlikely. It's just like, what do you mean knowledge? You'd think that as they get smarter and smarter, they'd be less susceptible to fraud. But until you hear what the second thing is that they found, coupled with the fact that they have knowledge, because of their knowledge, for that same reason, they shut off and they don't listen to others. They seem to feel like they have enough knowledge, they have sufficient information that they can do it themselves without consulting, without having a mentor, without having a third party that they can go to regularly to ask questions and to make sure that they can have someone to bounce things off from. Boy, now listen, when we talk about investments, we'll have a lot of opportunities to make some suggestions to you. I'm going to tell you one of them that you're hearing here time and time again. Make sure that there's somebody you can always bounce your decisions off from. Always ask somebody, someone that you trust, somebody that might be good at managing their own personal financial resources, someone that you might hire that's like a CPA or someone that just charges a fee to help you with the process. Always have somebody that you can go to and experience just a few moments of asking questions and sharing with them what it is that you're doing. Because I'll just tell you this, the research that was done by these two great groups found that actually financially literate investors are the one most susceptible to fraud. You can find that at FINRA.org, but we'll talk more about that later. So investment fraud victims are financially more literate than non-victims, and investment fraud victims are more likely to rely on their own experience and knowledge when making investment decisions. Now, yesterday when we were talking about million-dollar choices, I've already told you a little bit about winning lotteries. It's going to make you successful to win a lottery and to suddenly have a lot of money. The research is very conclusive, and I know that no one wants to hear it, and I'm not going to deny you the opportunity right now of believing that somehow if you won a $200 million lottery, life would be happy, things would be successful. I'd love to show you how many people I have as clients right now that have come across large amounts of money in some way other than earning it, that are specifically frustrated and discouraged. Their overall quality of life has gone down because of the new choices, the new options, the new variables, the new friends that they get in their lives when somebody feels like, or somebody knows, is exposed to the fact that they have some kind of financial resources. It can actually be very devastating. So I'll just tell you this: that the book that we talked about, I think when we discussed this before, was this. It said that a book came out where they researched like 500 individuals who came across large amounts of money in some way other than earning it. And they said within 5 years, 85% of those individuals reported that their quality of life went down instead of going up, somehow thinking that winning the lottery or coming across a large amount of money in some wonderful way will make it so that you'll begin to realize your financial goals and expectations might not provide for you the outcomes that you'd hope for in this process. You know, run fast, jump high. I know a lot of people that feel like their key to success and fame and fortune and money and prosperity will come as they maybe become a professional athlete. I thought you might be very fascinated in research that was done by the Sports Illustrated magazine that said this. They found that 78% of all professional athletes are bankrupt within 2 years after leaving their profession. And that includes those that were paid tens of millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars for what they did. It'd be fun sometime to give you a long list of those individuals who literally made over $100 million, some over $200 or $300 million during their careers in athletics, who now are flat broke. They have nothing left because of it. So somehow the whole notion of doing it either through winning a lottery, through becoming a professional athlete, or maybe even inheriting it. You know, once I inherit a lot of money, I can't tell you how many people will come to me and say, Brother Marsh, it's time to do some financial planning. I say, great, what kind of assets do you have? And they go through a couple of things, and they say, and by the way, when my father passes away, I'll get about $5 million. And I always pause just long enough for them to know that might not have been the smartest thing that they've ever said, but I just ask them this question. I say, is there something about your father's life that would make it so that his death seems somewhat inevitable or might happen short term? And they, oh, no, we didn't mean it that way. That's not what we were trying to say. And I said, but isn't it somewhat morose to you to feel like you're doing your financial planning by anticipating someone else's death? I'll just tell you, when it comes to inheritances, I know that you don't want to hear it because obviously a lot of people, I'm going to tell you two things about inheritances you don't want to hear. Number one, they don't provide the success. We find that as they go on to a next generation, the next generation kind of works a little bit and has their own problems. They're almost always gone by the second generation, unless some significant things take place. And that's why you'll want to be particularly attentive in our perpetual legacy class, where we talk about ways that you can hopefully make it so that will be a blessing to your children and not a curse. That's the first thing I want to tell you about inheritances. They might not be what you'd anticipate. Now, the second thing we've already started to talk about in our other classes, and that's just this. Your parents aren't going to die as quickly as you thought that they were going to. Actually, longevity is going up significantly, and the curve is bending in an almost exponential way. There's a fairly good chance that your parents are going to... So I always tell my students at BYU, I say, don't anticipate your parents' death as a tool of your personal financial plan. Create it by yourself. Number one, it won't do much good. And number two, you may never get it during your lifetime. So just kind of not put that on your list of things that could happen to you. So this says 85% of all wealth has gone by the second generation. We talk about single objective cure-alls. I'm not going to deal with that a lot right now. There's a lot of evidence to suggest a lot of people will say things, boy, I've never known a person that was ever not successful who paid tithing. I've never known a person that was not successful who didn't always contribute 10% to his 401k. I've never known a person who was not. Just know this, the formula needs to be fairly complex. Don't count on single objective cure-alls in this process of trying to understand what will be the very best for you. Let's talk about the high-impact motivators. Remember, we're still on the bumper pads. I'm going to get to some very specific things in our next section. So I'll just know that for right now, we're still doing bumper pads. We're trying to keep you in a mindset or a mind frame. So a lot of these things will be principles. They'll be ideals. They'll be values. They'll be things that if you can experience these principles, ideas, or values before you start the process, you'll substantially increase the probability of your success. The first on the list, after being in this class, would not be a surprise to any of you. It is as you create automatic tools, as you make it so that somehow you're not going to be susceptible to those things that have to happen every single day, as if you had to stand in front of a mirror doing positive affirmations or trying to kind of coach yourself every day to do things. Sadly, there's a lot of things in this life, a lot of things where significant change can only take place if you're really on it every single day, working on it, doing your very best. The funnest thing that you'll ever imagine, the money ball of this whole process is you can get it set up correctly, and it doesn't take motivation every single day. I would like to think that what could happen in the right scenario is that people could really pursue their causes in life, their values, their sense of expectation, their hopes, what it is that they'd love to accomplish in the purest, most eternal way, and just make all these things that we're talking about with money just kind of a sub-theme. Have it running, have that theme running in the background, but know that it's very, very efficient. So we do that as we turn these into very automatic or spontaneous accumulation solutions. The second is faith. And faith, in this case, I'm going to just define as you're inspired by an expected success. There's so many ways of describing this, but the one that just immediately came to my mind is not directly connected to personal finance, but I've always loved it. Elder Uchtdorf, Dieter Uchtdorf, said as a young boy that he believed, growing up in Germany, that his mouth and his mind was designed in such a way that he could never speak English. So they had tried in many ways to get him to speak English, and he was completely unsuccessful in speaking English, and had concluded that he would never speak English. During that process, one of the things that he loved to do was watch airplanes fly. He'd go out and literally spend hours every day sitting and watching airplanes go overhead. And he said that he concluded by watching those airplanes go overhead that he'd like to be a pilot. That's a very reasonable thing. There's a lot of young boys that decide, I want to be a pilot. Do you remember what happened? He then, as he explored becoming a pilot, found out that English is the universal language for pilots. All pilots that fly airplanes have to know the English language. As soon as he found out that English was necessary to accomplish the most important goal that he had, he said overnight he started speaking English, and his tongue was loosed, and everything seemed to be within his grasp because he had a concept, he had a long-term objective of flying airplanes that ultimately would only be satisfied if he could do what was the hard part, and that is learning English. I hope that in this process, now we talked about it with Ben Franklin. We talked about how Ben Franklin knew at the age of 16 a lot of things that he wanted to accomplish, but he decided for himself that he'd never be able to accomplish those things if he had to worry about whether he could pay his mortgage payment or not. Wouldn't it be cool? I'll just tell you this. I'd love to see each one of you take time tonight before you go to bed. As you say your prayers, I'd like to, while you're on your knees, I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to actually write down 3 things that you do. 3 things that you do. Now, so if it was Dieter Uchtdorf, it'd be flying airplanes. If it's you, what is it? What would you do if money did not make any difference? What would you do if you wanted to be compelled by an expected success that you could experience? I would hope that that would be something that would make it so that this process to you would be far more beneficial or far more valuable, even eternally, as you go through the process. There's another one that says this, and you've all heard it before. If we can align our professional and financial objectives with our core values, that will substantially increase the probability of our success. We're going to talk about this in later classes. I know I say that a lot, but I apologize. I'm just, because as soon as I think about it, I think about all the things I'm going to be telling you when it comes to how do you align your core values with what it is, or align your financial objectives or expectations with what it is of your core values. The best way that I can describe it to you right now is it was in a talk that was given by a dear friend of mine, Clayton Christensen. Clayton Christensen and I grew up in Rose Park. We grew up together. He was about a year older than I. We lived in the exact same ward. I tell my students that I believe in fame by association. I'm famous because of who it is that I'm associated with, and so I'm famous because I know Clayton Christensen. He's been recognized and acknowledged as a world leader, as one of the most creative and intelligent intellects in the entire world. And so can you imagine that someone like me grew up with him? Clayton Christensen had gone through some very significant health setbacks. The first one was he developed what's called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That was actually the same type of cancer that took his father, who was our stake president. He succumbed and died because of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So he was during the process of overcoming this non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He'd gone through the treatments, and one day, as he'd been out doing some work, he was driving back to his home, and he felt some problems in his heart. And they seemed to be significant enough that he determined it was probably smart to take himself to the hospital. Fortunately, he was only 2 blocks away from Boston General Hospital, which is one of the leading heart institutions in the entire country. He drove himself to the emergency room, and they said that had he not gotten there that quickly, the nature of the heart attack that he'd had is what they call a widowmaker. It makes a lot of widows out of those who have those kinds of heart attacks. And so here he is, he'd had cancer, he'd had this major heart problem, and as he had started to overcome both of those, he was one day lecturing in front of a group in one of a church meeting, and he said he started to feel some numbness in his face. And before he knew it, he was on the floor, he'd had a stroke. So he'd had cancer, he'd had a heart attack, and he'd had a stroke. Because of those, the Harvard, where he's a professor at Harvard, the Harvard Business School, they said it might be good to have him give our commencement address this year and tell us, what's the last thing you'd want to tell people? What's the one message after having these kinds of life-threatening moments? What would you like to tell the students here at Harvard? He got up, he gave his lecture. It was called How Will You Measure Your Life? Harvard put that up on the internet, and it became the most requested a statement or download from Harvard in Harvard's history. Never had more people requested more downloads of this wonderful talk. Because it had been so good, Clayton decided to turn it into a book. You can get it. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life? Oh, although we will have an opportunity to talk about it more later, I will just tell you, and there are specific ways, there's some things that we're going to suggest as specific recommendations for somehow trying to, in the best possible way, to align your financial objectives and your career or professional objectives with those things that are truly significant, are truly of value to you. Clayton talked about how when he was working on his Rhodes Scholarship, he was so brilliant. It just surely made all of us who knew him closely feel very inadequate intellectually. When he was working on his Rhodes Scholarship, he said he took upon himself to every single night get on his knees. Every night get on his knees. And for 1 hour, he dedicated to one single objective. And guess what it was? It was, Heavenly Father, why did you place me here on this earth? What is my calling in life? What am I here to do? And that's what ultimately this book became. I highly recommend it to any of you. And it becomes a great tool as he, of course, he's very out of his entire book. He says, if you want the highest impact motivator you can possibly have, follow the core values. Follow those things that are causes. Follow those things that provide the most eternal significance in your life, and you'll significantly enhance the probability of your success. Our next one is partners, and how you relate to and are successful with partners. We have some partners that are very obvious, our spouses. There's nothing that could make this process more devastating than to not have a good partner relationship. There's nothing that can make this process more enhancing and more possible than when you have a good partner relationship. We'll talk more about it today when we talk about community intelligence. So for right now, just know that when it comes to those that we choose to select as our partners, our team members, our business partners, our marriage partners, our neighbors, and others, ultimately that will go a long ways towards our eventual success. Something that's very closely related to it is the communities where we become involved in those who really are accomplishing things of significance. But we'll talk about it when we come to it. So an example is just to make sure that you have an example. You have a compelling example of the success that you want to accomplish. We talked about this sometime in another section, but I'll just tell it to you because I like it here. When I was at the University of Utah finishing my MBA, we had a little kind of a guest lecture series. In that guest lecture series, they'd have people that had been particularly successful at different things. The guy that came though the day that I remember so distinctly, his name was Wally Wright. He's the guy that created the trolley barns down in Salt Lake and turned them into malls and they call it Trolley Square in Salt Lake. He did the same thing out in St. Louis and created these wonderful they were very strong successes at the time. Wally Wright did something that was very unexpected. He stood up and he just said this: I'm going to teach you something that I'm going to bet that you have not heard while you've been going here to the University of Utah. And I'm going to tell you this, it's the most important single thing that you'll ever have in your eventual success. Now, that's kind of a fun gauntlet. You can imagine 100 MBA students sitting on the edge of their seats and saying, tell me more. I think, something that's more important to your eventual success and something you've probably not heard. He said, once you have your degree, he said, I want you to pick the industry or the company or the individual that you'd like to work with, the individual, the company especially. And he said, what I want you to do is before you pick the person that you want to work with, I'd like you to first find and ask this question. So without the emotional bias of the company or how well they might have, what they might be doing, he said, well, I want you to find the one person that's been most successful doing what it is that you would like to do. So in most instances, no matter what it is that we choose to do, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to kind of do what I'm doing right now. Nothing brings me a greater sense of happiness, joy, and success than to do exactly what I'm doing right now. But he says, just pick the one thing that you really want to do. And then he says, find that individual who has already established success in the most spectacular success in the area or that thing that you would like to do. And so he said, once you find that individual, here's what you do. You get an appointment with him. He said, now it's going to be hard. He gave us a few suggestions on how to do that. But he said, you get an appointment. Even if you have to go chase them down on the street and tackle them. He said, you shake their hand and you say, I will pay you for the opportunity to work for you. I've loved that quote ever since then, because he said, if you jump into a river that's already rapidly rolling, it will only make it so that you move that much faster. But if you dive into a cesspool and you try to swim out of that thing, it will always battle against any success that you try to accomplish. I know that each of you can understand in a hypothetical way, but I hope now a very real world, kind of sink it deep into your DNA. Make sure that you have very compelling examples of success that you're working with on an ongoing basis. That follows and is very uniquely related to mentors and those that can kind of go back and benchmark your success along the way. We'll talk about those more in just a minute. There's a great quote by Ezra Taft Benson. And that quote has kind of become the benchmark of a lot of great things that have happened with my students at BYU. And I love it myself in such a wonderful way. President Benson said this. He said, when obedience ceases to be an irritant and becomes our quest, in that moment, God will endow us with power. How many times have you been caught up in a circumstance where you became frustrated, you became discouraged, you became annoyed, you become set back, you just felt like things were not going well, and what you found was that it took a mindset or an attitude shift where you said, instead of looking at this as something that's discouraging, demoralizing, frustrating, or overwhelming, what I'm going to do is perceive whatever it is that I want to accomplish as a quest, something that's compelling, something that will actually make me a dramatically better person because of what I'm doing. If you can have that quest mentality, obviously it will substantially increase the success that we hope to accomplish. There's some great research. This talks about obstacles, and how you handle obstacles in your life. I actually have, and I've shown them to the students, 5 different research projects on people who became centenarians. That means they grew to be 100 years old. In all 5 of those research projects, done completely independent of each other, they asked this question: what is it that we could feel like might statistically increase the probability of actually turning into 100 years old? And in each of those cases, what did they find was the single leading contributing factor to their success, or to the fact that they became 100? They said this: they had a very healthy attitude about the way that they overcame obstacles. And here's how they defined a healthy attitude. The first thing is that when something bad happened in their life, they didn't just pass it off. They actually accepted a time frame within which that they could actually feel bad. They could remorse. They could specifically feel like somehow that was something that they obviously wished that would not have happened to them. But they, after a certain period of time, whatever it is, so they say that actually feeling bad about something, curling up in the fetal position, crying, doing something that really reflects the feelings that you're experiencing, the emotion, that's healthy. That's good. You should actually do those things. But then there should come a point in time where you can put all that behind you and move on. Now listen, when it comes to finance, when it comes to our careers, when it comes to our professions, obviously there's going to be times where we have obstacles. If we can develop that unbelievable ability to make sure there's a healthy period set aside for feeling bad or experiencing sorrow, but then getting over it and moving on to the next thing will be very helpful. Tracking, being proactive, making sure that somehow the way that you're doing things. One of my favorite quotes comes from President Monson, and it obviously relates to this very specific thing that we call keeping track and making sure that somehow we don't get caught up in some world that just says, oh, it'll just happen kind of because of who we are. We know that we have to track our success. President Monson said this: when we deal in generalities, we shall never succeed. When we deal in specifics, we shall rarely have a failure. When performance is measured, here's my favorite part. Just kind of enjoy this for a moment. When performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported, the rate of performance accelerates. Can you see why we talk about that when we say, what are the things that will ultimately be the bumper pads, those things that will make it so that your success is far more predictable, far more rational, and far more possible as we go through this process? You can see why we've added that to the list. Making sure that we clearly understand how when we do this for another person, we become the Savior's hands in someone else's life when it comes to the way that we serve and the way that we help other people. It's amazing how much our ability to work is enhanced when we are able to serve others and become someone that they can look to and rely on for the kinds of successes that they like. Just information, crucial information sources. I'd like to recommend to you a book that I found to be very good. It's called Change Anything. So when it comes to high impact motivators, how do we change our life? How do we experience the kind of success that we've talked about? How about a book called Change Anything, written by some authors that came from BYU and that were very successful in what they were writing, and basically said this, that anything can be changed. And they talked about these same kinds of, many of these same kinds of things. If you can implement those or integrate those as part of your plan, it will obviously enhance the probability of your success. That's the section, and I kind of hope you see some sense of we want to experience the behavior, the high impact motivators of what we do. Now what we'd like to do is talk about the financial intelligence or those critical information sources. This is where we're going to get into some specifics, some kinds of things that on a day-to-day basis, what kind of things do we know work, and what kind of things do we know not work, and what can we do with those things that work and do not work that make it so that our success is more probable, and we can avoid the things that can obviously be very expensive and very costly, and we can have some demonstration of why they've created problems in other people's lives. So what we want to do is this. We want to combine, number one, strategies that work with, number two, information that empowers individuals. And then we, much like President Monson suggested, that we have targets, we have specifics that can be reported. We want to make sure that there's a target. We want to make sure that there's some place that we have as a long-term objective that we can point to, that we can begin to enjoy the success that comes by knowing the light at the end of the tunnel that we're working towards. So the first part is stuff that will happen because we've already talked about it. These are strategies that we know that work, and these are not going to be a surprise because we've already been through them, so we can go through them quickly. Number one, we purchase a home. Number two, we have a 401k, and we participate and put 10% into our 401k plan. Number three, we have an accelerated debt reduction plan, much like the one that Elder Ashton suggested in the book One for the Money, where we accelerate and we utilize the principles that are associated. I can't begin to overstate the reality of what it can mean to us to get involved in a process where we very systematically take care of the problems that are associated with debt. Our fourth one is $1 million choices. And so that's just our basic formula. It's nice when we've talked about this. Are there other things that I would put on the list? Now, these are the four that I give to everybody. And I'm going to be very clear with you that a couple of things I'm going to suggest right now have actually contributed to some people's success when it comes to generating long-term prosperity or financial security, but they're not for everybody. Let me give you an example of one. Number one, owning income-producing real estate. That means you own a duplex or a shopping mall or something like that. Those have been important contributing factors to some people's success, but why are they not for everyone? Can I just tell you in the strongest possible way? For every single person that I know that's ever become successful investing in real estate, I know at least 10, 20, 40, maybe 100 people that literally had one of the financial catastrophes of their life by purchasing real estate. It's hard. It's much more difficult than anyone wants to make it sound. There's lots of nothing down, get-rich-quick seminars that you just put nothing down on the real estate. You acquire real estate as fast as you possibly go. If you knew how many people, one of the guys that wrote a book, I'm not going to tell you who it was, one of the guys that wrote one of those books, made a lot of money telling people how to do nothing down real estate, called me at one point in time, wanted me to come get him out, bail him out of a very tough situation that they had when they tried to buy up a bunch of property up in northern Utah. And they got in a real hot box. It didn't work for them. And they lost millions of dollars on those projects because they didn't do them. It can be hard. Take a deep breath and just know this. I own a little duplex. I like my duplex. It's kind of a nice thing. I only bought it because it was not right next to my home, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't turn into some kind of a duplex-looking type property. I bought it years ago, but I've actually enjoyed it. It's been nice. It's something that kind of provides a rental income on an ongoing basis. I will talk with it more about it when it comes to investments. But for right now, just know that that can, by someone who certainly has a number of years left to go before they hit that point of choice, that can become an important contributing factor. But once again, it's not for everybody. Can I just reemphasize one more time? We haven't talked about it today yet, so maybe it's something that because we've talked about it before, you're seeing this for the first time. I will just tell you this. Those 4 things that we talk about as part of our class are available to anybody. Can you see what I'm talking about? Doesn't matter whether you're a school teacher, doesn't matter whether you're a police officer, doesn't matter what you choose to do for your profession, you can do those 4 things. Purchase a home, put 10% into your 401k, do an accelerated debt reduction. Yeah, can you see where anybody can do those? This is something that's only specific to individuals who are in the right circumstance, but I just want to make sure that you know that's on the list. What's the next one? That's not for everybody, but it's certainly something that's contributed to their people's eventual financial success, and that's owning your own business. Sadly, when you go to a lot of personal finance workshops that are, of course, done by individuals who want to kind of churn a lot of income and commissions and revenues by telling you bold and wild and exciting things, the first 2 things on their list is owning income-producing real estate and owning your own business. Whew. What is it about owning your own business that makes it so that it's not for everybody? The IRS is a great source for determining or identifying or quantifying business success. So each year, when someone starts a business, they file a tax return. The IRS can look at how long they filed that tax return, how long that business stayed in business. The IRS has fundamentally said this 95%. Boy, sometimes when we share statistics, they roll glibly from our tongue, and we forget just how significant they are. They said this, 95% of all businesses started in America today are completely out of business. They're unprofitable. They're broke within 5 years of starting that business. 95% of all individuals who start a business are completely out of that business and not pursuing it within 5 years. Does that tell you what kind of risk is associated with it? Does that give you some clear indication? I just have to tell you in the strongest possible way, I know a number of individuals that are my clients who never owned their own business, never owned any kind of income-producing real estate, and they were still successful working with the strategies that we've talked about. But take a deep breath. For those of you who would like to explore that possibility, now I own my own business. So I own some income-producing real estate, and I own my own business. They just happened to work out well for me. That just seemed to be something that was a little bit better. I got to tell you a quick story that kind of relates to that. Clayton Christensen, I took 2 of my sons back to see him one time, and he was talking about his mother. And he's talking to my sons, and he said, I want you to know something that happened when we were young kids. My mother sat us down one day for a family home evening. And in our family home evening, she said this, you guys got to talk more. So this is Verta Mae Christensen talking to her kids. He said, you got to talk more. You got to get out there. If you're going to be a missionary one day, you got to learn how to talk. You got to learn how to communicate. You got to learn how to get out of yourself. You got to get out of these books and actually get out there and start talking. And then she said this. She said, now take Scott Marsh. He said, that guy could make a lot of money and become very successful selling used bubble gum. Now, as soon as I heard it, I said, Clayton, I don't know if that's a compliment or not. I said, no, it really was. She really had. So maybe my ability to be involved in some of these other endeavors were kind of a byproduct or something of that ability to kind of get outside of yourself and do things that maybe somebody else. Could I just have you take a deep breath and make sure you understand that I don't think any of you have to do any one of those 2, but I do believe for those who would like to do it, I can see where they do increase the probability of your success, and so give it your best shot. Here's some other contributing factors, some that we've already talked about. Mentors. I talk about that in almost everything I talk about. I'll just tell you that the benchmark of having a mentor. What's a mentor? I want you to think about this for a second. What's a mentor? A mentor might be somebody who actually knows more about something than you do. That's a possibility. A mentor could sometimes be someone that you just meet with on an ongoing basis to see how well you're doing at the goals that you've established for yourself and the steps that you decided to take within a certain a certain time period to be successful. I'll just tell you, mentors. And we'll talk more about it so that you'll see what happens. But I'll only say that success is dramatically enhanced when you do indeed have some kind of a mentor. Now, in this case, we're going to talk about marriage as being, now remember we talked about it could potentially being a problem. Look at this research that was done by at the Ohio State Universities, where researchers showed that a person who marries and stays married accumulates nearly twice as much in personal wealth as those that are single. I always look at my students once I give them that statistic, and I say, for those of you who are still single, how many of you now feel even more motivated to be married than you ever did, knowing that it'll be a significant contributing factor to your personal prosperity if you do it and do it correctly? And we'll teach a class on prosperous partners and how that will be very helpful to the process. But so nevertheless, marriage is very healthy. Number two, another one, how do you take care of your health or staying healthy? Here's a great research project that was done that by the British Medical Journal. It just said this: the healthier you are and the richer you will get. And I know that you can all imagine that. I know that you can experience for yourself what it means to just have a healthy emotional attitude, a healthy physical being, a healthy sense of what you can do on every day to make things happen because of the great health that you've experienced for yourself. My next one is just be optimistic. And you know from our research on how long it is going to be before someone dies that optimism can be such an important contributing factor in success. So now that we know the ones that we know work, let's put those on the side. These are the ones that we've determined very clearly are the things that work. Let's talk for fun about some of the things that we know through our research do not work. I think you'll have some fun with this. I probably will not take as much time with this as I do with the students, because the students, I feel like, sometimes need to have a little more kind of groundwork because they're young and they really haven't seen a lot of these things happen. But I'm going to assume that those who are listening to this tape either have a knowledge or an awareness of some of these things, or they can at least have access through Googling things to learn more about it. So here's the first one: debt consolidation loans. What's a debt consolidation loan? Here's kind of an example of a home equity debt consolidation loan. I just tell the students collateral means is, sometimes referred to as security that you have against a loan. It's assets that you pledge as a borrower for security for a loan payment. Don't worry about the technical definition. Let's just kind of put it in a very visual way. You buy a home. The home costs you $200,000. You have a $20,000 down payment, and so you have to take out a $180,000 loan for the rest of the property. That's very common. When you take out that loan, what you do is you pledge the house as collateral for the loan. So if you can't pay back the loan, what do? They take back the house. That's what it means to have as collateral. So it's pledged specifically so that if you cannot follow up and pay off the loan like you had anticipated you would, they can come back and take back that home. Now watch what happens over time. So let's just say, for instance, here's your purchase price of $20,000, and after you purchase the property, the home goes up. So let's just say 10 years later, at a 6% growth rate, the home is now worth $358,000. If the home is worth $358,000, you have additional equity. See all this additional so here you bought it for $200,000, now it's worth $358,000. Now you have all this additional equity. This is ownership that you have in the home, because the home's worth $358,000 and you're still paying off that $180,000 loan. You have all that additional equity in the house. And so, God, you got all this additional equity, but let's just assume over time that you've actually borrowed other money. You might have borrowed money to buy a car. You might have borrowed money to do student loans. You might have borrowed money there's a number of different things that you could borrow money for. Somebody comes along and they try to suggest to you an opportunity for you to take out a loan, take out an additional loan. So now let's increase this loan that you have right here. Let's increase it from $180,000 maybe up to $300,000. That would still have sufficient equity. That would make it so that you could take out maybe another $120,000 in debt. You take out $120,000 in debt for what? What you do is you take that money and you pay off all those other debts that you have. By paying off all those other debts, what happens? Now watch how this works, and we'll see if we can go through it quickly enough. So here's your mortgage payment, the $160,000 balance. Here's an automobile loan. Here's a Visa card loan, a MasterCard loan, that kind of stuff. Now watch this. Here's the payment that you're making. Here's the interest rate that you have on each one of those loans. Here's the balance that you have on those amounts. So right now, it would be very common to be paying about $541 a month for these other debts. Somebody comes along and suggests this. They say, let's just take all those debts, let's borrow some extra money against your house, and just roll all those debts into one payment. And because it's now borrowed against the house, instead of having to pay $541 a month towards it, your new payment towards this home equity debt consolidation loan is much lower. It's only $106 that you have to pay. So there's the $106.04. So instead of paying $541, you're only paying $106. Does that sound good? Yeah. You say, God, that'd be great, because now the interest rate that I'm paying is lower, the amount of money that I'm paying is much lower, and so why don't I do that? And there are indeed a lot of very specific advantages. One payment, lower payments, lower interest rate, tax-deductible interest, makes borrowing more possible. Are all those things good ideas? The sad thing is when we look into the behavioral realities of these loans. When we look into the behavioral realities, I want you to know this. The American Bankers Association did this research. They said, now kind of follow this, because it's a number, and for those who want to tune out with numbers, you got to make sure you get this point. They said this: of all those that take out a home equity debt consolidation loan, within 3 years, 85% of those people will have reoccurred every debt that they had when they first took out that loan. So they'll have all those payments back. So all those payments that we had here will come back within 3 years. And so then we'll have the bigger payment here, plus we'll have the higher amount that we're paying towards that home equity loan. It behaviorally doesn't work. So what I'm going to do is put down here, and actually I said 3 years, it was 82%. Within three years, 82% have reacquired all of the debt. And here's the problem. If your income is right here, can you see this little bar? It says, there's my income. But if these are my expenses, how do I fill in this gap between my income and my expenses? I do that on an ongoing basis by taking out more debt. Well, somebody comes along and says, well, just consolidate all those debts and move. But if I don't change this formula right here, if I don't make it so that my income grows or my expenses decrease to meet that level of income, I'll go right back into that same hole. I have to change the behavior that got me there in the first place. And so my goal is just to change the formula and to make it so that you don't have that this formula here. You have a formula where you make your income live up to your expenses. I will tell you this: back in conference some years ago, President Monson, before he became the prophet, before he became the president of the church, said this. He had something that in Samoa they call a makawhake. I went on to New Zealand, and so I know something about the Polynesians. And a makawhake is just this. In Samoa, they can go out and catch crabs very easily. Do you know how they catch crabs? They take a little piece of chicken and put it on the end of a string, and they just dip that chicken down into the water where they know crabs are. What happens is a crab will come up and latch onto that piece of chicken. They don't hook the crab with a hook. The crab's not got handcuffs on. There's nothing actually compelling that crab to get caught other than the fact that the crab won't let go. They literally will hold on to that piece of chicken, and even though they know they're getting reeled in, they will continue to hold on to that piece of chicken. Do you know that one of the things that President Monson suggested as a makawhake was those debt consolidation loans? I would only hope that you would see that. Can you see what I mean now by these are strategies that we know don't work? They've actually got a lot of people in a lot of trouble. Once you start taking out those home equity debt consolidation loans, it just becomes a narcotic. You just keep going and going. It's something that's very difficult to let go of, so try not to do that. Another thing that we talk about, investment life insurance. I'm not going to get way too far on this because when we do our investment lecture, we'll talk a lot more about it. But for right now, just know that investment life insurance. Let me just give you, for those who don't know, there's two fundamental different kinds of policies that you can purchase. One's a term life insurance policy. That works just like health insurance. This works like automobile insurance or homeowners insurance. You pay a premium, and if you're paying the premium when you have a problem, they will pay a benefit. A long time ago, someone came up with a spectacular kind of thing in insurance that said this: why don't you just pay a much higher premium, and then you'll build up this investment account. And this investment account's got all sorts of different potential benefits that are associated with it. We'll get into more of it later. Can I just tell you this? I've been teaching life insurance classes now since 1980. I think I probably have experienced every kind of life insurance there is. And I'll tell you that there's only really one type of life insurance that the vast majority of all people should be purchasing. It's called term life insurance. Let me give you a quick illustration. Here's a little thing where we took a 35-year-old individual and a 45-year-old individual, and here's your term life insurance rates right here. Here's these whole life or these investment life policies that we talked about. To buy $500,000 in face value, it cost a premium of $285. The whole life policy would cost $5,515 a year. Can you see the difference? So instead of paying $285 a month, $285 a year, you pay $5,515. A huge, huge difference. And so there's term life insurance. You just pay your premium, you get a death benefit. With whole life insurance, you pay the premium, but you get a death benefit and an investment. I don't know how to say it better. 80%. Now, how does this fit for our behavioral reality? 80% of all life insurance policies purchased in America today will be canceled within 5 years after they purchase that policy. If you put a lot of money into this whole life policy right here, you'll basically lose all of it. I can only tell you, and like I say, we'll get into it, but just know that I have always told people, and I do not know of an objective financial consumerist out there today that does not say the exact same thing. Just avoid investment life insurance policies. Term life insurance, that's the way that you find enough life insurance to cover you. When we get into our life insurance, we'll talk about how much you should have and how you can afford it and what you should do. Now, if you do have one of those investment life insurance policies right now, don't do anything with it until you've counseled with a good advisor that can tell you what the pros and cons are and make sure that you've decided for yourself very clearly and accurately. Don't just because we've said it in this presentation go out and cash in a life insurance policy and go try to find something else. Make sure that you've consulted with someone else and make sure that you get the new policy in place long before you purchase that policy. That'll be very helpful. My recommendation is you just purchase term life insurance and all that extra money. So instead of $285, the difference between $5,515 and $285, I'd like you to just invest that in your 401k. That will obviously be much better for you. The quest for a higher than expected yield. How many of you would like to have been an investor with Google when Google first started out? How many with Microsoft, with IBM, with all the companies that just seem to have an exponential growth curve? Everyone would like to have that. We have this wonderful thing that we call our annual investment yield. Let's assume that you've got one of those higher investments. Isn't that kind of fun? Wouldn't you like to see something like that? There's a very interesting thing that takes place when we have those higher investment yields. We have to take more investment risk to get the investment yield. We'll talk about it in investments, but most of you intuitively know that. To get the higher yield, you take higher risk. As you take that higher risk, what happens? Let's assume that you were one of those people that got into Google. Let's assume that over a 4-year period of time, Google averaged an annual yield or an annual rate of return of 40%. So I've been getting 40% on my investment during that period of time. And suddenly one year, instead of having a 40% rate of return, they only have a 20% rate of return. You see what happens? The guy that had the 40% rate of return calls his broker and says, hey, what happened to those 40% rates of return? Those things were really cool. I like that. I want to find something that will do that same thing. And so the broker very willingly says, let's try something else. Let's kind of put you into something else that we project will actually have those higher yields. What is he putting you into? He's putting you into something that has a lot of risk. Actually, and the most amazing way, and the reason, just kind of for yourself, have a little fun with this, sometimes the enthusiasm to have that higher yield is counterbalanced by the reality that within 5 years, any investment losses that you experience will cancel the above average investment gains. In other words, yeah, for 5 years you had a good investment yield, but so then you kept chasing. So the higher yield became the expected yield. And when you expect something more, you end up taking higher risks and you end up losing so much of it. There's a scripture that I think kind of fits this whole situation. And so there's your risk of losing. But here's the scripture. It says in Proverbs 28:22, he said, he that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not that poverty shall come upon him. So now think about it. Here we say, yeah, they had the higher than expected, so he hasteth to be rich. There's sometimes you really will get those higher than expected yields. Unfortunately, it turns you into someone who expects those higher yields, and you do not consider carefully that poverty could come upon you. So be careful. Make certain that somehow your enthusiasm for getting the higher yield does not counterbalance the obvious reality of the risk that you're going to take. Now, I put traditional budgeting up here. We talked a little bit about that when we did our $1 Million Choices. When I say traditional budgeting, I don't want to have any misunderstandings. Do I believe in budgeting? Absolutely. I'm only when I'm talking about what things do not work. Now listen, I'm just talking about behaviorally here. Behaviorally. Do you remember what we talked about? And remember what we said about the percentage of people that follow a formal, written down budget that we call level 6 budgeting. Remember level 6? We keep track of our expenses. We categorize our expenses. We anticipate our expenses based on what we've categorized, and we reduce those expenses over time because of what we've done. We found that only less than 0.5% of all individuals who've ever tried to do that are actually successful at the process. So when I talk about behavior, I know this, most financial classes start off with the first thing they say, if you don't have a formal written down budget where you're keeping track of it meticulously on an ongoing basis, you'll never be successful. Can you accept counsel in two different environments that I believe can exist at the same time? Number one, behaviorally, it's tough. If you want to do something that behaviorally has a stronger probability of success, I'd start with some of the other things first. Here's the other environment that I hope you see. I love budgeting. I think you should budget. I think it's very helpful. For those of you who can accomplish that objective, I would hope that that becomes a very integral part of everything that you do. Here's my next one, rent-to-own purchase contracts. You know the big game's coming up? You got bad credit. Somebody says, you used to have this thing where we'll allow you to rent rent anything that you want to purchase. Even though we'll talk a lot more about it later, can I just tell you this? Those rent-to-own purchase contracts can be very detrimental to your financial health. Why? Because they found that over time, if you actually own that long enough to purchase whatever it is you bought, whether it's a TV or a washer, dryer, or something like that, if you actually do purchase it, you'll pay 350% more than you would have paid had you just purchased it and taken out a contract and paid it off over time. Rent-to-own purchase contracts have been declared in most every, the United States government, when it comes to their armed service employees, defines that as a predator practice, and they highly encourage the servicemen in our country to never involve themselves in those kinds of contracts because they are so expensive, they're so deceptive, and obviously cannot. One that's very closely related to it is small dollar loans. Small dollar loans. You've seen these little outlets. You can go borrow $200 and with the next paycheck you can pay it off. Those small dollar loans, it's not uncommon for them to charge as much as 500%. If you roll that thing over one time, you can go as high as 1,000%. 1,000% interest while you're paying that thing off. You know, I was once teaching this at BYU, and I had a gal that came to the class. Can I just tell you this? If we look across America today, now see if you can kind of capture what I'm trying to suggest could be the problem we're experiencing. If we look at those across America today, we find that the county or counties that have the highest number of people per capita, they have the highest number of small loan outlets per capita in the area. One of the ones that's the highest is Utah County and Salt Lake County. Utah and Salt Lake County, where a vast majority of all individuals identify that, well, especially in Utah County, where 95% of them represent themselves as members of the LDS Church, you'd think that somehow they've got a higher level of understanding, awareness, and appreciation for some of these principles that we talk about. So some gal, as she was in my class, said, I just can't believe that. So she took off that day, and as she was driving back to Orem, she said, I counted every payday loan outlet. She said, I'd never even thought about it before, so they just never had caught my attention. She said, I counted every payday loan outlet between BYU and my home. She said, I counted 13 of them. We'll talk more about them when we get a chance. In fact, I'm going to give you a little bit about how they work right now so that you'll get an understanding of them. Small dollar loans. Now, can I go through this a little quickly with you? You can come back and make reference to. There's a number of different kinds of these. There's those payday loans that we just talked about. There's some that are auto title loans where you go down and you hand in the title to your automobile. It might be a 1-month loan or a 6-month unsecured installment loan, 1-year unsecured. Let me just ask you this question. People always ask me, Scott, isn't there a usury law? Is there some kind of a law that says you can't charge too much money to someone borrowing money? There is in almost every state in America today, but there are 5 states that have no usury law whatsoever. You can charge anything you want to. The states are Arizona, Delaware, Idaho, South Dakota, and Utah. I ultimately don't know exactly what that logic is, but I can just tell you how devastating it is to know that we're living. And look how many of those states are right around Utah: Arizona, Idaho, Utah, not far away, South Dakota. Can you imagine? There's no usury law whatsoever. You can charge anything you want to. Of course, that's what it is, I think, that leads to the high number of payday loan outlets per capita in these states. Can I just, in a class like this, commit you to making sure that you don't do that, and a number of other things that are closely related to it that you've seen before? Tax anticipation loans, credit card cash advances, rent-to-own contracts that we just talked about. You'll see that guy on the TV that might be in boxer shorts that say, you come down and buy my car from my company, and we don't turn anybody down. We give them they don't turn anybody, and they're right. They don't turn anybody down. But if you saw the unbelievable expenses they're charging and how they wrap so many of those expenses into very not, very in the kind of the corners of the contract that make it so that you're unaware of what you're paying. It's just devastating what kind of things can be charged. Look at this. On those 6-month unsecured loans, they can charge as much as 36%. And I always have up here what the reference point was that we found that out. Here's on your credit card advances. Now, if you use your debit card to go down and get money on a cash advance, that's okay. But if you use your credit card, if you use a credit card to do it, I have to tell you this, the average interest that's charged if you use a credit card to get a cash advance is about 76%, and that came from the Consumer Foundation of America that did that research. In tax anticipation loans, they can charge as much as 149% interest. It's very common. In 1-month automobile title loans, 250% per year. In rent-to-own contracts, 311% interest per year. If that does not scare you away from that kind of a contract, perhaps nothing should. In those 2-week payday loans, the average loan pays 426%, and if you roll that loan over just one time, the interest rate can go over 1,000%. I hope that kind of the whole thing from this just says that's probably not something I want to experience. Automobile, no one's turned down on those contracts. It's 30% that they can charge on it, but they have a lot of different other things that they charge you, like extended warranties, credit life insurance, etched glass, all those kind of things that everyone that talks about it will tell you they're just not necessary. Anybody that's objective, consumers will say those are traditionally not necessary when you buy those cars. But with somebody that really needs to have that car because they have bad credit, they'll basically sign up for anything just to have somebody give them that contract, obviously not in your best interest. We talked before about 2-income households. When you have 2-income households, it's okay for you have a 2-income household. I'm not suggesting that, but when you use both of those incomes to qualify for a loan, it can be to your devastation. We talked about in our last class that book from that 2-income tract by Elizabeth Warren. I'm only bringing it up right here. We've already talked about it, so it's not necessary to go through it again. Just know this: there's a very long list, 10 reasons why America's 2-income families aren't what you think they are. You might want to just Google that. Elizabeth Warren, 10 reasons why America's 2-income families aren't what they are. And boy, there's a very significant list there that would kind of make you pause before you think that somehow by having more income that would come by having both of you out there working, it might not provide the benefits that you ultimately would seek. I, of course, as I talked about before, use the Millionaire Next Door as part of my class. And the Millionaire Next Door, just for fun, I just want to suggest these are people that have gotten very good at building up resources and ultimately multiplying their prosperity. In that book, it just said this, and this is their research they came up with. They said the spouse rarely worked. In those households that got very good at this, the spouse rarely worked, and if they did work, they did not have any time-consuming professional careers. Kind of a nice little thing that you might want to consider as it comes to those kinds of opportunities. In that book, The Millionaire Next Door, they talked about something called economic outpatient care. And economic outpatient care is this: money that we give to our adult children that we probably shouldn't be giving to them. It's a very my students in class, I just harass them. I just beat them up with it. My parents of those students would pay me twice as much for what I do with them in those classes. That's when you go back. Now listen, I do have an exception to it, and that is education. Those that are in the Millionaire Next Door, they do say they'll pay for their kids' educations. That's and it's your choice whether you'd like to do that or not. But I'll just say this: once that education is through, I just commit my students. I make them raise their hand and swear that if they ever need any money, they will not go back to mom and dad. Why? The pressures that you create in your parents' life when you do that are unbelievable. It's so sad. If somehow we knew what parents go through, I can't tell you how many people have sat in my office and in tears talked about these long-term relationships. They co-signed on a loan with a child, and they're paying all those payments. They promised a child that they'd pay him a certain amount of money over a long period of time, and then now they can't afford it, and it's causing financial devastation for them. I just say that it's one of the single leading threats to your long-term financial security is to enter into these kinds of relationships with your adult children. The research will just show this: for every dollar that you give an adult child, it decreases that same adult child's income-making capacity, generating ability, or enthusiasm to make money by a dollar and sometimes even more. There's a direct negative statistical. You think that you're empowering them. You think that you're giving them hope. You think that they're giving them new possibilities and opportunity. Our research shows that actually it's working against them in a very significant way. I'll be quick. There's merchant shopper card incentives, that kind of stuff. Some of you will be just stunned at some of the things I put on this. All these things are different things that merchants will say are great tools for your financial success, like frequent flyer miles, preferred shopper miles, gift cards, contests, coupons, all these kind of things. For right now, because we do talk about this in a future lecture, can I just make sure you understand that most of those are on their surface. You think that they're somehow that's so good for you. But the reality is they can be so devastating. I'll pick one of them, gift cards right there. Do you know that the average American family today has $400 in gift cards sitting in drawers or in cabinets in their home that they've never used? They just didn't use them. The American Retail Consumer Foundation found this, that of all those people that spend money on a gift card, they'll spend 30 to 50% more when they're not paying cash. They're just using it for a gift card. There's just a number of reasons why you want to be more careful with the way that you do that, and we'll make sure that you have some recommendations that will make that possible. So for right now, we'll just leave it at that, and I'll come back to it when we get a chance. When it comes to information that empowers, this is going to be short. This is going to be just, I think, quick enough that you'll just get the point without going into a lot of detail, but you'll have the opportunity to come back and review it as you feel like it's necessary. Information empowers. We've always set for our students as we pursue these great information sources. We said that we wanted to make sure that the information that we received was insightful, that it was objective, and that it was user-friendly. I owe you, or we as students owe you, the opportunity to make smart financial decisions by going out and anticipating all those choices and providing you the information that's necessary to make great choices. I will tell you that as the students came up with a lot of this information, it became, I just have to tell you that it was stunning. I mean, oftentimes I'd look at some of the things they found, some of the sources of information they found, and I would just be stunned. I'd be surprised. I'd be shocked. I'd just go, how in the world can someone provide all that information free? I'll give you a good example. Mint.com is a great budgeting tool. And Mint.com, before they ever put it out, and it's completely free. Anybody can use it that wants to. They put $15 million into research and creating that program before they ever put that out. Is that stunning to you? Is that surprising that they put all that money into that research and into that developing those tools, and they just make it available to you for free? I just think that's so cool. So because of that, we actually added one more thing to it. Some of these sites are surprisingly insightful, objective, and user-friendly, so we call them our SIOU research sites or information sources. When we'd have the students look through this information, they had three different major objectives: the content, the design, and the credibility of the source that they were going to. And then they had 12 different specific questions that they had to answer. And as they found each of those information sources, they had to rank each of the information sources in all 12 of those different areas. And then what they would do is, after they had ranked them, they'd go back and say, then what is the very best source for you? That's what we'd like to recommend. On our website, scottmarsh.com, this is not a site that has any kind of pop-ups. There's no income generation source. There's nothing associated with this whatsoever. This is just the site where we've placed this student information. There's this student research that has been done over a long period of time. And here's just one example. Here's your $1 million choices. We've talked about it before, and so we did it when we talked about $1 million choices. We won't go through much of it right now, but you can imagine that there's all these different opportunities to make great $1 million choices. Well, wouldn't it be cool if we knew that we had access to that material? If you go to the part on a website called Education Week, I'll just tell you this. These are the sites that year that the students, in anticipation of Education Week, said were the most surprising, insightful, and objective user information sources. We just talked about Mint.com. For those of you who engage that, when I ever teach a class, I say, how many people here have used Mint.com? A lot of the hands go up. I say, how many of you, leave your hand up if you enjoyed it? And I don't think I've ever seen a hand go down. It's a wonderful website. For those of you who'd like to budget, like to use that as a tool, I think you'll very much appreciate it. Very expensive for those who set it up, but it's provided to you completely for free. There's another one called Price Grabber. You can know before you buy anything exactly what you're going to pay for it. There's one that's called consumersearch.com. Consumer Reports or something like that will charge you on an ongoing basis to get information from them. This is completely free. And they claim that they've gone out and done the research with all 5 of these different consumer search sources and found ways for you to save money. I one time bought a camera, and the camera that I bought, we looked it up in consumer search, so we found the exact one we wanted to get. Then we went to Price Grabber to find out what we should pay for it. I went to the store, found exactly what the camera was, and told them, but they had a much higher price on that camera. And I said, right here, it says that I can get that camera for this price. The guy said, look, I went into his back room. He came back out. And he said, my boss said that's more than we pay. That's less than what we pay for the camera when we buy it. But we do have a guarantee that we'll match prices. And so they did indeed do it. It was kind of fun. Zillow.com is a great information source for real estate. For those of you who have not been there, go look up your own home address or go look up any kind of address and find out what kind of evaluations have been placed on it. Some states are better than others. Utah is not an open record state, and so Utah is not quite as accurate as in other places. But I'll just tell you this, the amount of information that you can get there and the tool that it provides for you to be far more efficient in negotiations that you do with individuals buying and selling real estate can be very effective for you. PowerPay is the one that we talked about when we talked about engaging in the accelerated debt reduction program set up by the Utah State University. You can go there and do that completely for free. It's a wonderful source. The United States government is a great source for information at usa.gov. There's literally tens of thousands of research projects that have been done by the federal government that are provided to you completely for free when you go there. Glassdoor is one of our very favorite ones that our students work with, and that's, you can, when it comes to selecting a company that you're going to work for. Glassdoor is one that you can go to, find the company you'd like to work for. They'll tell you what kind of questions they'll ask you when you go through the door. They'll tell you what kind of benefits they pay, what kind of compensation you should expect to receive when you're there. How they get all that information and combine it into one source is just beyond our imagination. Certainly, if you're looking for a job or know someone who is, Glassdoor.com is something that's very wonderful for them. Privacy rights, we'll talk about that when it comes to the kinds of information that's being kept about you on an ongoing basis and tell you why that can be so important and so helpful for you. Then finance at cch.com is a wonderful place where you can get a lot of financial calculators that others might charge you for when you're out on the internet. They charge you some fee to use them because they're quite sophisticated calculators. Here you can go to that website and get all that information for free. Our students the next year just said, what are the 10 most the 10 sites that you need to know about, and the 50 top sites that they could find. And so here's the 50 top sites, and I just wanted to expose you to it so that you can see what kinds of things are available at each one of those sites and just see how many different kinds of, I just have to tell you, this is all the students, and they've done the research where they've gone out and they've said these are the 10 top most important sites that you can be aware of, and then they've extended that and said what would the top 50 be? And all of them are there. There's an explanation of what's on that site and why it is that the students rated it so highly in the kind of information that it could provide you. If you, when you're using our site, find it to be a little non-user friendly, can I just suggest that you're right? There's probably not any financial website in the country that's more complex, that has more information that's sitting there available for you to engage and to learn from. The sad thing is as we've typed more and more things into it and provided more and more options, this has been going on for years and years, it just became a little cumbersome. When you go there, I just wanted to point out there's a little box. It's a search box that we've added to it, that if you wanted to find out something about home mortgage, if you wanted to find out about something about debt consolidation loans, you wanted to find out something about investments or something, then you can type out what it is, and it'll do a wonderful Google search of our site to tell you where you can find the information that indeed you'd like to find. I think that's very helpful. So on another time, and now watch, we're going to go through these quickly, but I'll just tell you real quick what they are. This was another year, and the students this year wanted to find the top 20 websites for education that we could expose people to at Education Week. Destination RX, well, just if you type into that, they'll tell you exactly what the least expensive place is to purchase prescription medications. Free gas help, I tell you, you can get free gas. The students always love this one. If you put one of those wraparounds around your car that advertise things, and you drive a certain number of miles each month, they'll pay all your gas for you. So that might be something you want to consider. Credit Karma is one of the best websites you'll imagine. We have access to our credit reports. Unfortunately, the access was somewhat limited for a long period of time. And along came a website that said, not only do you have access to your credit report, you have access to your credit score, and you can have access to it as much as you want to. And by the way, every time your credit score changes, we'll send you an email notifying you that something has changed and allow you to type in and find out what it is that has changed and what it is that can make it so that you can improve your credit score. I'll tell you, that website right there, and you using it wisely and making sure that your credit score is what it should be, and you see what it is that makes your credit score move, can be one of the most successful things you'll ever use. Bill Shrink is obviously just a great way to pay less money for a lot of different things. Free shipping, over 2,500 companies. So you order something over the internet, and they say you're going to get charged $7 or $10 for the shipping, go first to free shipping and look at it. There's 2,500 companies that you can get a coupon that will make it so that you can get that free shipping knocked off for you. Mashable and Alternative 2 are just great websites that are all inclusive. They're probably two of my most famous, my most favorite websites, because you can type in almost anything there. Type in almost anything that you'd like to experience. One of the examples I gave to Mashable or Alternative 2 was there's a website that makes it so that you can go to meeting. Some of you have heard of it before. You go to meeting, but go to meeting costs money. If you went to Alternative 2 and said, go to meeting, what's the alternative? They actually will call up a website that will do the exact same thing, but it will do it for free. So that's a kind of example of what can happen at Alternative 2. It can be very helpful for you. Recipe Matcher is one of my very favorite ones with the students. They really enjoy it. Let me tell you why. You can go in and actually type in, what you've got. Instead of what you'd like to eat, you can type in what you've got, and they'll give you a recipe that will match what you've got. So if you've got a can of corn and a can of black beans and a can of Windex, or a can, I was just kidding, but just whatever it is that you have, they'll send you back a recipe that will make it so that you can actually create what it is. My students have done this a lot at BYU and made that a nice date for themselves, where they invite everyone to just bring something, and then they find out what it is that they can turn that recipe into. It's a great little website. Find a Better Bank by the very name. Now, these are all sites that the students have researched, and they said they're surprisingly insightful, objective, and user-friendly. Just obviously gives you a lot of information about the banks that you're working with. Rentometer is good not only for people that rent places where they live, but also for landlords that rent those places. You can literally go to rentometer.com, and they'll actually show you the rents in your area. So you could look down the street and say, that house is an equivalent value to the one that I've got, and I'm paying $1,500, and that guy's paying $1,300. That would be a great negotiation tool to take back to your landlord and say, hey, this guy's getting a better rent than I am. But it's also a great tool for landlords to make sure that they're charging enough in the area where they are. Groove Shark, allows you to download a bunch of music, and of course for students that's very important. Brightscope. How many of you have a 401k? And you'd like to know if your company has a good 401k, if it's rated very highly for its efficiency. You can go to Brightscope, type in the name of your company, and they'll tell you. They'll actually rank the company that you're with. You type in the name of your company, they'll rank the 401k that they have there against other companies for whether it's performing very well or not. White Fence, these are just a couple of more cost helpers. These are ones that are much like this one that we talked about over here that was Bill Shrink. These just opportunities to go in and type in no matter what it is, whether it's your utility bill, whether it's your gas bill, whether it's your food bill, whatever else it is, you can type those in and see if there are better ways of affording those. Let me give you a couple things real fast. This is books. Everybody always asks, do you recommend certain books? And I want you to know there's some that I believe are very good. This is what's on that website right now. It'll be replaced real soon. Because right now what we've done is we've given the ones that we believe are very good books 5 stars. The ones that we believe are not very good books 1 star. I'm going to take all those 1 stars off my list. I think if a bright and intelligent person wanted to go to a website to find out what they should be reading, they could, by knowing that a book's not on that list, have a high degree of probability or certainty that that book is not what they should be reading. And it's just, I don't know, there's something to me about telling that a book is not as good as you'd want it to be that I find to be a little distasteful. So, but for right now, it's up there. Everyone always asks me when they go through one of our workshops, is there some place that I can go to learn more information? And that's certainly one of the opportunities that you have to do it. Here's just a great screen that reflects our $1 million choices. These are things that we've all gone to. So right there you have that, and which ones have been the most valuable and most advantageous. And so it gives you not only the ones that we took care of yesterday when we were going through class, but also gives you a lot of other different potential types of $1 million choices that you might find very helpful. I like telling my students about this. This is just smartphone technology. Some of you may have already done this. There's the opportunity now that you can do this. You can take your smartphone and you can take a picture of the barcode that is on any product that's there. You upload that picture and it will tell you a number of different things. It will tell you what the price is that you should pay, and so it'll give you a number of different comparative prices that will tell you what it is you should pay. It'll tell you a lot of information about read product reviews, search for different things on Google, Amazon, and it's just a very, very helpful website. And once you find that information, then it gives you a lot of other opportunities or tools for knowing where you go. And I wish I could show you some of the times that I've used this and some of the ways that right there on the spot, it's helped me to negotiate a better price with whoever it is that's selling me something. The one that I'm showing you is called Scan, and it was sold not long ago. It developed over 50 million users. But I'll tell you this, the students, the individuals that created that website that tool were all students at the Brigham Young University, and they sold it. Now, this is a very public thing, so it's not a secret, so it's not anything that I'm giving you that might be insider or anything like that. They sold that tool for $57 million, and all of those individuals, while they were developing that tool, were currently students at BYU. Just kind of thought I'd throw that out as an opportunity to get some other potential benefits from. We've talked about, now remember, we're still just going through this wonderful sources of financial intelligence. We've talked about that as wonderful tools of menus, food menus, and how you could actually create a 30-day meal menu. There's a place on the internet that you'll find on our website where this contains all the information that the students found out about these different recipes or these different diets that they had created. Remember, there's 21 different areas, 21 different types of eating plans or diets that people used. They went out and actually purchased, they selected menus that fit into those different areas. They went out and did the shopping. They found out how much you could save by doing it. They created the recipes. They make sure that and so it's all just built out for you. There's been a lot of people who have sent us information on our website to say how much they've appreciated that tool, because it really did give them a lot of information and a lot of possibilities that they had not previously anticipated. The only thing I'll share with you is this. We said that we wanted to have great information. We wanted to make sure that we had, but we also said the targets. I still have to go back to our tool, our point of choice chart that fundamentally just had these goals. We want to make sure that everything that you do is believable, that it's visual, that it's written down, and that it's measurable, and that it's meaningful. As you do that, and as you also create this opportunity to utilize mentors to return and report, we believe that ultimately you'll be exponentially more, it'll make this whole process exponentially more possible to accomplish or succeed at the goals that you've created for yourself. We've been going for some time now, so you might want to shut things off and kind of take a deep breath, but I really don't have a great deal more, because the next category, the thing that we talk about, is something that's far more a principle that we'll discuss as it talks about prosperous planning partners that will come in a different lecture. So just let me introduce you to it real quickly first. So we talked about behavioral intelligence. We've also talked about financial intelligence. Community intelligence is what we want to focus on. And it'll be fairly short because I just want to make sure you understand this. Ultimately, our goal is to recognize that there's a lot of individuals who are going to become part of this process. We want to find out, whom do you choose? Whom do you choose to listen to trust, to follow, to serve as you go through this process, to select as friends, to select as a marriage partner, to select as neighbors, to select as team members, to select as professional partners, to select to work with, to network professional prosperity with, to target as clients, to connect with and engage in internet communities. I hope it's fairly obvious that this really does become a fairly kind of a dynamic process. There's a lot of possibility with this. There's a lot of things that you have to understand just how important it is to know that your ability to work with others will be a very strong and dependent part of the work that you do. I want to share with you a couple of quotes by Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey talked a lot about this, and he talked about this process of synergizing and creating interdependent, not independent realities. Let me start off with a couple of quotes. They're long, and normally on a PowerPoint presentation you don't want to have long quotes, but I think they're so powerful, I just felt compelled to make sure that you see them in their entirety. The first one is this. He said this: to synergize describes a way of working in teams, to apply different effective problem solving, to apply collaborative decision making, to value differences, to build on divergent strengths, to leverage creative collaboration, to embrace, and you can tell that he spent a lot of time coming up with this paragraph. It's so beautiful. To leverage creative collaboration, to embrace and leverage innovation. It is put forth that when synergy is pursued as a habit, the result of the teamwork will exceed the sum of what each of the members could have achieved on their own. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. One more, he said this: independent thinking alone is not suited to an interdependent reality. Independent people who do not have the maturity to think and act interdependently may be good individual producers, but they won't be good leaders or team players. Now listen to this last sentence. He said they're not coming from the paradigm of interdependence that is necessary to succeed in what? Not just in finance and in business, but in marriage, in family, or any kind of an organizational reality. I hope you can anticipate and sense why it is that we've included that as one of the intelligences that are so critical to this process. Now, what I'm going to do is go through some quick kind of examples of this. I will not spend a lot of time with it, but for right now, just know this. Here's a couple of good ones. Here's community intelligence, but these books, how many of you have heard of Wikinomics or macro-Wikinomics, where they found different groups that are getting together on the internet today and creating just extraordinary products because they've learned to work together in teams. They create what the Wikipedia calls spontaneous order, where by working together and by working as teams, that they can create so many things that are so much more effective and so much more valuable to us, and will be so much more effective when it comes to your personal overall prosperity. Here's a book that was written called The Wisdom of Crowds, and in this book it says large groups of people are smarter than an elite few, no matter how brilliant, better at solving problems, fostering innovation, coming to wise decisions, even predicting the future. And they give a number of different examples of how the future has been predicted so well by people who know how to work together. I tell the students at BYU this. I've had a number of different groups that are academic. They've come in to give us our accreditation, and to kind of make BYU to discover what their accreditation or the considerations are for accreditation. Sometimes they've asked me to come in and meet with those people. I tell them every time someone comes, the first question that they ask me is, how well are you getting the students together to work in teams? Now, it's fascinating. Before I do that, I asked the students, I said, if I came into this classroom today and said, we're going to work in as individuals, your entire grade will be dependent on how well you can do things as individuals. Or, as an alternative, I came into the class and I said, every single grade that you receive in this class will be dependent upon your ability to work in a team. You'll have to actually find ways to work with others in order to be successful. And I asked them to raise their hand. Which environment would you prefer to have? Would you prefer the individual environment or the team environment? Nearly every hand goes up for the individual environment. Then I say, why is it that they want us to get you together and work in teams? Where are they getting that expectation? They're getting it from the companies, the ones that employ individuals. They want to find the ones that have the ability to work very well in teams. Here's a book that was written by Michael Eisner with the Disney Corporation. It's called Working Together. It was written, with Aaron Cohen that was writing it too. But he gave a number of different examples. I think there's 10 of them here that talk about individuals who became very successful working together with the Disney Corporation, with Berkshire Hathaway, with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. They give a number of them. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. I'll just say these are 10 stories that will show why working together is actually better. Here's what the Army says about it. They say teamwork, when they say, the Navy SEALs is this one. It's individuals play the game, but teams are better. They beat better odds. Here's Andrew Carnegie, one of my favorite quotes. He says, teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments toward organizational objectives. It is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. Here's one of my favorites. Henry Ford said, coming together is beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is a success. I want to tell you a story about a family that originated in Israel. And they are one of the most motivating groups that I've seen before. They're called the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds, just know this, Brother Rothschild, he's a brother, they're all brothers to me. Brother Rothschild sat down with his family one day in a family home evening. They probably didn't call it a family home evening, but it was a great event that they had together as a family. Brother Rothschild sat down with his family and he said this. He said, I'm going to hand each of you, he had 5 sons. That's why it's kind of compelling to me too, because I have 5 sons. He sat down and he looked at each of his sons and he handed them an arrow. This is back in the 1800s, so it was an old wooden arrow. And at each of them an arrow, and he said, now break that arrow. And of course, each of them were easily able to break that arrow. Then he handed each of them a handful of 5 arrows. And he said, now break that all together. And of course, none of them could do it. He said, I want you to know that individually, we're completely breakable. Anybody can destroy us. But together, we're unbreakable. And if we work together in the goals that we pursue, it will greatly improve the probability of our success. He went ahead and loaned each of his sons a certain amount of money, and they all went and bought banks, they all created banks in different European countries, and their prosperity has survived through 5 different generations. I think that they're in the 5th, they might be the 6th generation. It survived very handsomely, and there's some wonderful things that have come from it. So he just said this, individually we're easily broken, united our potential is unlimited. It came through the Rothschild family, a very unique definition of how that can be a success. This is benchmarked, this recommendation that we're making is benchmarked even in the scriptures. When the Savior said this to those individuals in John chapter 17, he said that they may be one as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they may also be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. and the glory which thou gavest me I have given to them, that they may be one. And remember this process of being one in our pursuit of wonderful objectives. There's nothing about the theology in the gospel of Jesus Christ that's more critical than the fact that you cannot be exalted except as you do it together. And everything that we do has that element built into it that's probably not available, I don't think, in any other theology that I'm aware of. You have to actually accomplish the objective together. So look how many times in that concept of one comes out of it. I think that you'll find quite quickly that as we collaborate with others, the nature of our success can be greatly enhanced. I'll only say this. One of those things that we refer to as community intelligence comes from a subset of that is something that I refer to as spiritual intelligence, who you're listening to. Now, when it comes to who you're listening to, I would like to suggest the students have done a massive research project. Now, we're going to include this in the tapes that we create on this website. Can I just tell you this? We've turned it all into the ageless seeds of prosperity. And I won't take a lot of time describing it here other than to just simply say this. The students have gone through different stages. In fact, I'll kind of go through it really quickly. The first thing that we did was we had each of them go out and we had them read the scriptures and not all of them, they'd be assigned to just read 6 chapters or something and then identify every single place in what they had read where the scripture talks about or mentions prosperity, money, wealth, riches, debt, grade, whatever. They'd identify those first. That went through 3 different stages and 3 different semesters. The first stage was individuals. Then we had it confirmed, so we had a second witness. Then in the third semester, we had the groups verify the results that they received. I just wanted to show you this. These are the verses that they identified and how many verses there were that had something to do with wealth or prosperity or greed or riches or something like that. The total was 3,212. Then what I had the students do is go back and say, but which of those verses had nothing with it? So it might have said that somebody was rich in happiness. Well, that's not, even though they use the word rich, that's not something that directly relates to money or something to do with prosperity in the way that we've suggested it here. So I had them eliminate the verses that did not have something to do with specific to do with prosperity. And I will just tell you this in a fairly definitive way, in a probably more a definitive way than anything you've ever seen before, that there are 2,229 verses in the scriptures that indeed relate to this concept of prosperity. Our second stage was to then identify where that's been quoted in general conference. I'm going to go through this quickly because we're going to talk so much more about it later on. So where it's talked about in general conference, a wonderful website, scriptures at byu.edu, where you can actually go and type in any verse, and they'll show every single time that's been quoted in conference. Here's Mosiah chapter 4. It's one of my very favorite chapters of Scripture. Here's where Boyd K. Packer talked about it. It will take you to that. By tapping on that, it will take you to exactly where he used that in his talk, and you can learn more about it and what they said about it when they did it. I will tell you this for the first time I'm announcing that the BYU has now turned this into an app that you can get on your phone. And I just, especially for those who teach gospel doctrine or have the opportunity to see that, I'll just know that this is a wonderful app where that you can live, and on the app you can go to any one of the verses that you want to. They'll give you a complete overview of what that was said, and they'll show you where it has been quoted. And the presiding bishop's office has asked for a copy of this. Once we get it up on the website, we hope to have that done real soon. So the stage 3 of the process was to then identify every single time that was used in the Deseret Book LDS library. So not just in the scriptures, but also, not in general conference talks. So here's the scriptures, here's general conference talks, here's LDS library. You can do that by going to gospellink.org. And so once again, we'd find every single place that was talked about, and the students were asked to write a sentence. They're asked to write a simple sentence summary of what it is that they found there and what kind of things that we could learn from it. They had to then identify, this went on over a 9-year period of time. We had the students doing this research. In stage 4, they identified the cause and effect correlations, the if-then relationships. I promise you, as a classic example. So they might have said something like, Abraham was rich. But it doesn't tell you much about a cause and effect, doesn't it? It just kind of as a statement of fact, it said he was rich. But what we like is the cause and effects, if we can, to learn something about if we were to experience prosperity, how could we do that? One of the scriptures that comes to mind as soon as you say that is what he said, what the Lord says in 3 Nephi 24, where he was quoting Malachi 3. He said, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of the whole, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Pay your tithing, yeah. If you'll pay your tithing, then, you see the cause and effect? You see the if-then relationship? So if you'll do this, then this is the promised blessing that can be extended. And so then we made sure that they very carefully identified which ones of them had those cause and effect relationships. This is one of my very favorite parts. We then had the students, completely unknowing, completely unaware of why they were doing it. We just had them rate on a scale of 1 to 5. whether it was a positive statement about money, or if they felt like it was a positive message or a very negative message. It was precipitated by a book that by a dear friend that wrote this book. And in his book, he started it off in the very first part of his book. And his book was all about money and what the scriptures say about money. He, in the book, started off by saying his students would come to him. He taught at Institute for a number of years. He said the students would come to him and say, can you be rich and can you be righteous? Can you be worthy and be wealthy? Is it possible to be affluent and be not diverted by it? He said, how would the scriptures answer those questions? This is the question he'd ask his students. So then I usually ask the class if they can cite a single verse that speaks positively about money. A single verse that speaks positively about money. And here was his conclusion. He said, in all my 35 years of teaching, no class has produced a single verse. Can I just tell you this? The students came up with dramatically different results. When we asked them which ones have positive statements, here's a couple of them that were rated very high as the students did it. Look at this in Ecclesiastes. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. I don't know. It surely seems like to me that would be a somewhat positive statement about money. Here's another one in Helaman chapter 12, where the Lord says this. Now, I want you to see the connection the Lord gives about giving blessings. Now, if money is bad, if it's wicked, if it's evil, why would he give it as a blessing? Look at what he says. He said, he doth prosper his people, yea, in the increase of their fields, their flocks, and their herds, and in gold, and in silver, and in all manner of precious things of every kind and art. Now, some of you might clearly recognize that's when he goes on to say, but then they forget the Lord, and so then he has to send famines and plagues and pestilences and curses to remind them what it is that they're about. But just know, isn't it kind of cool that indeed he has given us this concept, he's given us this idea, or this, that he actually gives prosperity as a consequence or a reward for what? Obedience. Wow. I can't imagine. I can't imagine if it's bad, if it's so bad that we can't find one single thing that's good to say about it. It'd be pretty dang tough to find that somehow heaven is willing to provide us those blessings because of our obedience. Our sixth stage was to identify heaven's essential messages of prosperity. And that's where I'll finish this. Just this. The students then, they were given all these verses, and we wanted them to go and say, what is it that our Heavenly Father actually wants us to know? So remember, we're looking for who do you listen to? Who do you listen to when it comes to how you'll receive those messages or those blessings of prosperity? I'll just introduce you real quickly to a kind of, so they agreed on 12 different essential messages, and here they are. The concept of being a multiplier, the law of the harvest, the order that's created in order for these blessings to establish, how we have to be one in the pursuit, how when we're given certain blessings, we're also given a responsibility attached with the blessing that we've received, how the joys or the blessings that we can receive by being wise with our financial resources and sharing them properly can create everlasting joy and blessings because of what we've done, how there's cycles, like we've talked about, when we get so prosperous, we forget the Lord. There are the cycles of prosperities. This whole concept of being a good acquirer. I hope that I can reestablish with all of you why I believe that I tell all my students, how, if there was a meeting in heaven before we came here and you were asked, and here was the concept, we want you to be good multipliers, we want you to be a good acquirer, how many of you had done that and said, I'll be happy doing it, that'll be something I actually enjoy doing. There's a lot of different scriptures that talk about a man's responsibility, especially a man's responsibility, to be a good acquirer, be a good provider, and why that's so essential to the paradox that comes to charity, or the ability we have to share those resources, how they need to be consecrated, how all resources need to be consecrated because knowing indeed the source that they came from, and then indeed they are a blessing. They are a blessing, and it's okay to call them a blessing because it seems as if the Lord has been very helpful in establishing the fact that they are a blessing to us. One last stage, we just identified the correlation between each verse and all of those essential messages. So we'd give them one verse, and then we'd give them those 12 messages, and we'd say, how correlated are they with each of those messages? It was an absolutely remarkable process as the students did an evaluation on each of them. I hope that there's a number of ways that we can learn from that process. Now, instead of going through them all right now, I've told you that we are indeed going to come to a lecture that we take a lot more time, where we talk about the ageless seeds of prosperity. That's where we'll go through each one of them, talk about what their significance is, what kinds of verses the students identified as most closely related to exactly what that message is that our Heavenly Father wanted to create for us. I'm confident that will be very helpful for you. That brings us to the end. This was a long class. I identify that. I hope that somehow you're able to take a deep breath and say, there's parts of this that I could rewind and maybe listen to again, maybe slow down, maybe kind of stop and look at the material that's on the board and see if somehow that applies directly to me. What does it all come back down to? This process is indeed efficient if you'll allow it to be as efficient as it can actually be. I would like to hope that the vision of this whole thing comes in two things. Number one, it's available to anybody. Anybody that's got a job. Anybody that actually can go out and work and generate an income that's reasonable. Even an average kind of income, it's available to everyone. The second thing I'd like to hope, is that there's a lot of people listening to this that would they would really enjoy knowing that they can pursue the causes. They can pursue their values. As Clayton Christensen said, they can pursue their calling in life. They can pursue those things that actually bring them the greatest sense of eternal joy and eternal fulfillment. And in the midst of that, have a tool that's so automatic, that's so straightforward, that they can engage that tool in such a way that they never have to allow their financial circumstance to stand in the way of accomplishing the things that they most want to accomplish. Sadly, too many people get caught in that rut, don't they? How many people have you seen with that? The vast majority of all their time is spent worrying about, planning, trying to create new opportunities or develop something that has to do with money. The research will show if it can be a sub-theme. Now, some people, that will be their eternal thing. Go ahead and do whatever you need to do. But the research will show if everything that we're saying can be a sub-theme. If we don't spend all of our time in the pursuit of financial resources, if we don't spend all of our time trying to create new strategies, if we don't spend all of our time trying to figure out ways that we can not lose money on investments, if we don't spend all of our time figuring out ways that we can communicate better with those that are most in charge of this process, I'll just tell you in the greatest possible way. My wife and I started our point of choice experiment back in 1991. By 1995, we'd paid off all of our debts, and every single thing that we'd been paying towards debt payments, we then paid to ourselves. By the year 2002 was the first time I sat my wife down at dinner and on a napkin said, we've reached our point of choice. The system has worked well for us. We've actually acquired what is necessary to put us at a point where nothing we ever do in the future can ever be hampered or set back because of some kind of a financial reversal that's especially those that are well within our control, where we just made poor choices. It was fun. My wife sat and looked at that napkin, and it did make her happy. It should have. It was certainly something that made me happy. And she sat and looked at that napkin for about 10 minutes, and then she said, Scott, let me ask you this question. Could we double that? And I said, God, I guess. It surely seemed like it, and I felt like it could happen well within the framework of vision and values and goals and causes. I said, why not? Because what I'm doing right now, by that time I had begun teaching the students at BYU. I've always said this, the greatest single joy I've ever had, if I could do nothing, if there's nothing else that I could do on this earth, I'd stand in front of a group of students and talk and teach and create and write and research and develop and try to come up with new innovations, new creative opportunities for them to move their lives forward in a very fundamental way. I love what I do. I remember the time that I, in my class, said that we'd reached our point of choice, and somebody at the back of the room said, why are you here teaching? And I said, I'm so grateful that you asked that question, and I'm so honored to give you the answer to that. I said, I'm here because this is the one thing I do if money didn't make any difference at all, which then it didn't to us. And so I hope you see that vision. I hope you get that sense that I hope, and what I'd like to do is unleash, especially in this generation. I can't wait to tell you more later on about just how blessed this generation is and how remarkable it is that we have the opportunities that we have today. I would hate to see those opportunities set back or hampered or somehow depressed because we had to worry so much about money and about our financial circumstance. Just imagine keeping your mind that one goal. As you say your prayers tonight, you visualize for yourself what would happen. What would happen if you ask heaven for its blessings? You just say, what would happen if I could really truly pursue exactly what I want to pursue and I didn't have to worry about money at all? The science of personal prosperity will tell you very enthusiastically there are some parameters. There are some bumper pads. There are some specific recommendations that time and research have proven either work very well or that do not work very well. You go back and listen to this once and maybe twice again to make sure that you pick up and you identify for yourself and have approved with your Heavenly Father what it is that will make it so that this is most efficient for you. I promise you that if you do it in that spirit, this will become a process that will indeed bring joy and bring that peace and happiness that you've always sought. This process and these tools actually work for those who will engage them properly. Thank you.